What is up, you resilient rebels? I don't know, it's the best I got. How are you? Welcome back. Hey, what's going on? What about you way up here? Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Sober Psychology. This is the podcast where we do not tiptoe around your mental minefield. We're going to charge in with sledgehammers, probably some bad intentions, and definitely some dark humor. I'm your host, Michael, psychologist in training, sober warrior, and a guy who has sat through enough of these AA meetings to know that calling it a cult is almost like calling therapy a scam just because it makes you cry. Today we're tackling the elephant in the recovery room. Is AA a cult? It's that loaded question that's got the internet buzzing with hot takes, horror stories, and holy rollers. If you're in recovery and you've heard the whispers such as AA brainwashes you, it's a religious trap, or it's a bunch of old dudes chain smoking and drinking coffee, which is not, that actually is not far from the truth, that last one. Anyways, stick around because we're diving deep into the stigma, the history, how it's supposedly watered down from its glory days, its real benefits, which are backed by science, and even its surprising roots in Carl Jung's psycho-spiritual wizardry. Look, I'm not here to defend AA. I'm sure most of you believe that's the case, but I'm not here to defend it like it's my drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. If you're looking for a fluff piece, go ahead and switch to a cat video. We're getting raw. AA saves lives, but it's got flaws that could make a therapist blush. By the end of this, you'll have the hard truths to decide if it's a cult, a lifeline, or something in between. And yeah, we're gonna hurt some feelings. That's what we do, because pretending that recovery is all rainbows and unicorn farts is basically like drinking vodka and considering it hydration. So let's go ahead and unpack this beast. Welcome to the show where we break down the mental health stigma, navigate sobriety with humor, and prove that it's okay to laugh while you heal. Let's get real, let's get honest, and maybe a little weird. Growth is messy, but you don't have to do it alone. This is Sober Psychology. Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 44, another week. I appreciate y'all for being here. We'll go around again. Say hey to everybody. How are you? Welcome. Do the family. Hey, there it is. Boom, right here. Give you with the Zoom. What's up? Anyways, I appreciate y'all for coming back for another week. If you tuned in last week, we talked about kind of a boring topic, but we discussed so much mindfulness work on here as far as it being a positive solution for emotional regulation and just overall mental well-being, also helping with recovery, the recovery process. But we did a deep dive into journaling, which I know can be very boring. So if you watched it, I appreciate it. But we did the rundown on it, just talked about the history of it, why to do it, how to do it, and the benefits of it. And so anyways, hopefully that reached somebody. I had a few people actually reach out and talk to me about their process in journaling and how it definitely helped them out. But through this process, I realized I have talked a lot about the beginnings of this channel, the origins of this channel being focused on breaking the stigma of alcoholism and addiction and mental health overall. And one of the issues that comes up a lot, one that I was on the other side of the fence with, was thinking that AA is a cult. And I get it. I'm very open-minded. I am not one of these guys who thinks that AA is the only way. It actually says in the book that AA does not own a monopoly on recovery. However, I know that it works. So I'm kind of on both sides of that, right? So I understand where people are gaining their perception of thinking that AA is a cult. Oftentimes those are uneducated human beings, though. That's my issue. So we're going to dive into it. We're going to do a deep dive into it, and I hope I don't step on anybody's toes. As you all know, I am a product of a 12-step program through AA. I am a believer in it, but I do recognize some of its flaws, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to trash it. But anyways, we're going to dive in. Section 1 of this is the stigma and public perception, why everyone thinks that AA is a cult. So we're going to go ahead and start with the juicy stuff, which is the stigma. Public perception of AA is basically like that ex who talks shit behind your back, which is just going to be half truth and half hysteria. People scream cult because of the God talk, really, and then the anonymity that feels secretive, and the group chants that sound like a bad horror flick, right? You could do a quick scroll through Reddit or social media in general, and you'll see posts like, my ex-sponsor said that I can't think for myself. AA is definitely a cult. Or, it's brainwashing with coffee and cigarettes. I mean, hell, even Wikipedia notes concerns about its perceived, I'm going to read this verbatim, perceived religious nature and allegations of cult-like elements. And let's be real, the stigma around alcoholism itself absolutely adds fuel to this fire, right? There's a 2023 study in the Drug and Alcohol Review that found that alcohol stigma leads to prejudice, making people hide their recovery like it's a dirty secret, right? So no wonder AA's anonymity gets twisted into this whole cult secrecy nonsense, right? But here's the dark humor behind all of it, if you could even see it as dark humor. But if AA is a cult, it's one of the worst cults that could exist. There's no Kool-Aid. You don't have to pay any dues, and you can leave anytime without a chase scene, right? They do not care if you come or go. Yet critics like those on Intrepid Recovery say that the lifelong alcoholic label feels like a cult identity trap. And pop psychology calls this the illness narrative, which is the illness narrative critique. And that's there's a 2020 study in the Addiction Research and Theory that showed that ex-members felt disappointed by the rigid, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic vibe, right? And in recovery, the stigma keeps people away, thinking that AA is for real losers or Jesus freaks. And here's the newsflash: if you're blacking out every weekend, if you're running away to a bottle, just to try and get over your sorrows and your issues, you're already in a cult. It's called addiction, and it doesn't give you donuts or coffee, right? So you're already screwed. Why call AA a cult, right? I tried to do a deep dive on Twitter or X, because I don't ever do that for research for these scripts, but the recent chatter on X actually echoes this. There was one user that rants about AA's lunatic vibes while others defend it as life-saving. And the truth of it is the stigma hurts more than it helps, really. There's a 2021 study that found that people in recovery manage it by challenging perceptions or hiding, right? But that secrecy begins to feed that cult myth. And if you're avoiding AA because of this BS, you're letting fear win. You either own it or you relapse. It's absolutely your call. If you hate God and you hate community, I could see how AA looks like a cult to you, right? But skipping it because of that, that's your own addiction talking, you coward. Get out of it. There's this issue with the once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic mentality, right? I see it as you can go 3 different ways. Once you gain that label, if you will, you could either choose to completely reject it, and you could say, okay, I'm going to continue living my life the way I'm going to live it, which is going to put you in an early grave, or just be miserable. You're going to end up racking up all of these criminal records and all this kind of stuff. Or you can get to this mentality that you're going to outsmart it. Okay, if I'm an alcoholic forever, I got to outsmart it. And you can actually see this with Bill W. Bill Wilson, the guy who wrote the book, he experimented with LSD. You see this all over the news when it comes to recovery stuff, people trying to outsmart it, right? And they're trying to use, DMT and all of these psycho drugs, and just doing their best to try and have an experience that will unlock something in your brain. Does that work? I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it's just the same concept to me as like when someone tells you that God exists and you experience that for the first time, and then you choose to try and figure out if God exists, right? You're completely erasing the idea and aspect of faith. Okay, it's the same thing that we do. Like if someone tells me that I'm an addict, alcoholic for the rest of my life, I can never drink or drug again. Okay, I could see that as a life sentence, or I could see that as a chance for a new life. Okay, which is the third option in all of this. I accept it. I realize that I can never drink again. And I'm going to be honest with y'all. It is tough sometimes. It is really tough sometimes. But I've built a life where I'm never involved in any of that, right? When I do have these cravings that come on, it typically is because I had a memory that flashed back. I had a dream or something like that, and I romanticized it in my mind, and I wake up and I'm like, God, I wish I had a bottle in my hand right now. Or I get so overwhelmed with things that are going on I'm choosing to go to the bottle instead of go to God. I'm choosing to do the short term instead of work on the long term. But I've built this life where I don't feel like I need to drink. I don't have to escape from anything, right? I have things that keep me busy, and there are definitely things like video games or sports or, golf, whatever it may be, where I just dive into it, and I have to constantly check myself of like, am I doing this to avoid, or am I doing this because I thoroughly enjoy it, right? However you take it, this resistance to this idea that AA, or that you will be an alcoholic for the rest of your life, is not something that you should be scared of. But I do get it. As someone who went through recovery, I do remember having that mentality probably around the third step when I was working on that, where it's like, you mean to tell me I could never again? I could never ever touch alcohol again? I had built an identity around it. That was my only escape. It's the only thing. I mean, that's the hard thing about us addicts, alcoholics, is you are now removing the one thing that we go to for solace, for comfort, for escape, to alleviate any of the tension. I mean, imagine if you're someone who has chronic pain or, tinnitus, for instance, and you have a magic medication that gets rid of it short term, right? And then someone takes that away from you one day and says, this is actually killing you. You can't do it anymore. Like, that's your one comfort. So I understand what it's like to feel like that's a trap, but I also understand what it's like to be a bitch about it and whine and cry and use that as justification to go do whatever I want when I want to do it. I have looked into the research and studies of figuring out if there's a cure for alcoholism, 100%. And then I realize I'm doing that because I want to drink. That's just it. The reason that they tell you that in AA is, one, because it is true. You're never going to outsmart it, outthink it. You will always be an alcoholic. But then two, it's because if you think that if you're going to gain any type of notion that you're going to just immediately go back to the bottle and be okay, you're wrong. It will kill you. You will eventually go back into that cycle. Okay. So just accept it, or don't continue drinking and trying to figure it out on your own. Right. Section 2. This is going to be the history and the origins, right? This is going to go from Carl Jung's couch to basement meetings, basically. So we're going to rewind to how all of this cult stuff started, right? AA was born in 1935 from Akron, Ohio, when there was a stockbroker named Bill Wilson, or Bill W. He met surgeon Dr. Bob Smith, who is Dr. Bob in the book, right? AA, big book. Both were hopeless drunks, but they clicked over this shared misery, and then they stayed sober by helping each other, right? And then from AA's official timeline, it grew from the Oxford group, which was a Christian movement, right? But AA ditched the strict religion for a higher power that anyone could define, right? Even NA, I believe, your higher power can be a doorknob if it keeps you sober, which I don't agree with at all. I think that is just the most bastardization of a message you could imagine. However, I digress. Now, the Carl Jung twist comes into play. It was that Swiss shrink. He had his fingerprints all over AA, right? And in 1931, Carl Jung treated Roland Hazard, I believe is his name, who was a rich alcoholic, and basically said, medically, you're screwed. Only a spiritual conversion can save you now. And Roland ended up joining the Oxford group. He got sober, and then he passed the torch to Ebby Thatcher, who is the one who influenced Bill W. In 1961, Bill wrote Jung a fan letter, and there's a lot to it, but in it, it said, your efforts sparked the chain that led to AA. And then Jung replied that alcoholism is a spiritual thirst, needing a higher power to fix. And pop psychology loves this. Jung's collective unconscious inspired AA's spiritual awakening, turning personal hell into group healing, basically. All right. And that's why I love Carl Jung so much. And I'm grateful that I've been on this journey. I have not split from AA, but I'll be honest with you, I am not as rigid into the steps as I used to be, because I found the other ways to do the exact same thing that adjust differently to where I'm at in life right now. Right. So I'm not here to spread the new, like AA, if you follow the 12 steps, it works. If you dive into those steps, it works, but you have to do every bit of it. There's no, I'm only going to do 99% and maybe you can float that 1%. You cannot. You have to dive in. You have to be able to surrender instead of just comply. And when you do that, it works 100%. A big element of those 12 steps is the God piece in all of this, or the higher power piece in all of this, okay? So keep that in mind. That's why I said that I'm not going to sit here and defend AA like it is the only way. AA doesn't own a monopoly on recovery, okay? Is it a crucial aspect to recovery? Absolutely it is. Is it something that I can guarantee you works? Absolutely, 100%. However, there are other ways to go about it. That does not mean that you get to justify the easier, softer way. That just means that there are other ways, okay? Early AA was pretty raw. You know, there was no big book. There's just desperate dudes swapping war stories. And then by 1939, the big book dropped outlining the 12 steps. It absolutely exploded after World War II, and it ended up going global during that time, all right? But here's the hard truth. The founders were not saints, okay? And, you know, I have a couple of books on the history of AA and the Oxford group and all of that. It's pretty fascinating what you'll find in there. But anyways, Dr. Bob ended up relapsing pretty early, and then Bill experimented with LSD later on. And if that's a cult leader, it's a pretty sloppy one, right? AA's origins aren't brainwashing. They're two broken guys hacking sobriety in a world that called alcoholics moral failures, okay? You have to understand the history at the time and where these guys were coming from. These were prominent individuals. Dr. Bob's a doctor. If he showed up and said, you know, talking to this spiritual mumbo jumbo, you know, and he started talking about him, you know, being an alcoholic, you get put into an insane asylum, right? You don't just get treated. Like today, you're an addict alcoholic and you're going to get a process of detoxing, and then you're going to get put into a rehab, which puts you through a program. Back in the day, you get put in a straitjacket and they experiment on you. They're going to try and lobotomize you, okay? Bill W., you know, you could read the very first chapter of this. It kind of gives you the ups and downs of his story, and then you could read his biography. They've got really good documentaries on him too. But I mean, he was a very, very intelligent, very good at what he did, but then he fell off, right? He kind of had his life was just these peaks and valleys consistently, but you could tell that he was a bright human being who knew exactly what he was doing, knew how to talk to people, knew how to work a room. Most of these guys are prominent human beings. You know, they're making good money. They've got careers, they've got families and all this stuff. And then they had this underlying issue, which Carl Jung talks about being a, you know, spiritual thirst. Okay. Carl Jung basically said to AA, you know, you're spiritually thirsty idiots. And that's what I love about him, right? So this is kind of how a shrink's advice birthed the biggest recovery cult ever, right? You want to blame anybody, blame Carl Jung, I guess. I don't know. Don't blame him. I like Carl Jung. Section 3, how AA has evolved, watered down or just grown up, question mark. So you could fast forward. Has AA gone soft? Most critics say yes. I say yes. It's watered down from the founders' fire, basically. And in 1940s, AA was hardcore. It was rigorous. Inventories, sponsor boot camps. There was a 75% success rate in early groups. Bill Wilson himself, in my opinion, watered it down in 1941 by broadening the language to include non-Christians, which basically ditched the Oxford group's absolutes. Okay? There was a Reddit thread that I was reading that argues that AA is the same, but people are softer. More therapy talk, less tough love. I kind of understand that. I'm going to give you my opinions at the end of all this, though. Membership basically flatlined in 1993 at about 2 million, which coincided with insurance-funded rehabs pushing AA light. You know, The Atlantic in 2015 called it irrational, and they based the 1930s brain science. They based this on 1930s brain science, right? And now with agnostic meetings and online groups, it's more inclusive. But purists say that's dilution, okay? The New York Times in 1988 noted that the fading stigma as AA diversified, okay? And that was kind of a marketing push, right? As it was more accepting to everybody, there's a little bit less stigma beginning to happen. You know, early AA was like boot camp, and now it's basically like yoga class with prayers. You know, if it stopped working, maybe you stopped working it, or society's too soft for surrender, right? However, I digress because evolution isn't all bad. You know, AA is in 180 countries. It's adapting to modern psychology like CBT hybrids. You know, the myth of the good old days, founders had zero perfect records. There was relapses galore. And if AA is watered down, it's because recovery is mainstream, not a fringe cult. All right. I have a very hard time with this, and I did really appreciate seeing what I saw on Reddit talking about how maybe AA isn't watered down, maybe people are. I do agree that, man, this is gonna be tough to say and not just catch flack for. I do not believe that this AA or sobriety or recovery is genuinely possible without a connection to God. And I will say God, but your higher power. There's a spiritual element to it all. When it began, when it began, there was a much higher success rate, in my opinion, is because there were fewer people, but it was very rigid. Okay. If you read in Bill W.'s story in chapter 1, he went through the 12 steps in a matter of hours. Okay. It wasn't like we do today where we have 90-day programs. He went through it and he buckled up and had to do it. And I could tell you, as someone who had 90 days to do it, that would be tough to go through it in one night. That would be difficult. I do think that it's gotten softer. I've been to a lot of meetings that are, they're open meetings. They used to be closed meetings. I think that there was a lot of folding to the societal pressure, in my opinion, of why it got watered down. However, I was fortunate to go to a rehab where it was a boot camp. It's made to be kind of the last line. This is it. And I'm grateful for that, because the way that I learned the big book was the old school way of learning the big book. And unfortunately, I've seen the rehab that I went to that's already gone through changes that I look at and I'm like, holy crap, what are we doing? I think it's a difficult balance, right? You can almost find yourself in this category of like a fundamentalist. And that's been a struggle for me personally, because I do believe in the rigid rules. I do believe that there are non-negotiables. I don't believe in the gray area in a lot of aspects of this. However, you could argue the other side of it. I mean, do you think AA would have gone as global? Do you think it would be as successful if it hadn't provided more inclusivity for everyone? I don't know. That's the hard part. That's the debate. But I do know that if you genuinely think that your higher power is a doorknob, you will lose. You will lose that battle. It's not going to work for you. So it is what it is. And we can get into a spiritual argument about how, basically the main religions, the God character in them are relatively all the same. I'm not going to argue that right now, but I do think that AA has been watered down. I do agree with that. I also think that people are watered down, and I agree with that too. So who to cast the blame to? Yes. Right? So yeah, I'm just going to keep moving on, because I'm going to end up getting in trouble. I know for a fact that thousands of men and women have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, as the book suggests. I think that is a very valuable program. I think that it provides framework for those who don't have any of the blueprints. I had no blueprint. I'm arrogant, and I'm semi-intelligent, and I'm stubborn and hard-headed, and I still couldn't figure anything out. It got worse and worse and worse, and I had been told multiple times by 2 different doctors that I am driving myself to an early grave, and that still wasn't enough to stop me. I lost family, I lost friends, I lost a marriage, money, everything. I lost everything, and that still wasn't enough. I got my first part of my criminal record was a DWI, and because I blew a freaking .28 or whatever crap, it was stupid. I should have been dead, or whatever. And then got out of jail after the drunk tank, and within 24 hours of being released, I was drinking again. And then when I got my felony charge for assault, I ended up drinking again within 24 hours of getting out of jail. That's an issue. That's a problem, right? So I think if someone would have approached me in the midst of all of that with some watered down, soft way of handling it, you just do what you want and think what you want, I would have instantly shit on that. And I would have gone and done whatever I wanted to do. I am grateful to have had the experience that I had, where I was taught in a very hardcore way, in a very tough love fashion, the old school way, because that, in my opinion, is the only way for this to actually take hold. I'm grateful that I already had a relationship with God before I had gone into rehab, even though I had pulled away, because I know for a fact that without a relationship with God, I would not be sober today. God is the reason that I am sober, not AA. I want to go ahead and clarify that for the masses here. So you can make your argument all you want. Do I think that AA is a cult? I do not think that AA is a cult. I think that AA is a program, and I think that it's up to you to either comply or surrender. No one locks the doors on you. You can leave whenever you want. Okay? But I think the alternative of not utilizing a program like this makes your journey a lot more difficult. You can't yoga your way into sobriety. Okay? You can't think happy thoughts into sobriety. You need some tough rules. You need some guidelines. You need some muscle memory. You need some practices that are established. And in order for you to be built up in the right way, you have to be torn apart completely. There can be nothing left. And then the building begins. That is my opinion section of all of this. So now we'll move on to section 4, the benefits today. Science says it works, cult or not, okay? Cult or not, AA delivers. There's a 2020 Stanford review. AA is the most effective for abstinence, beating therapy alone, okay? And we've talked about the numbers of how cognitive behavioral therapy does wonders for fighting addiction, but AA still does better. It cuts healthcare costs for you, and it boosts coping, motivation, and networks, right? Harvard in 2011 said that AA reduces depression through spirituality and support. Spirituality and support, okay? Long-term attendance slashes relapse, right? It's like this community you can keep going back to, right? There was a PMC study that showed less drinking, more happiness. So we're seeing this trending too. I think I saw this the other day where these are like some of the lowest numbers in a long time of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds that are not drinking or that are drinking. Those are some of the lowest numbers that have existed in a long time. That's a win to me. People are sick of it, man. It ruins your life. I promise you. It gets out of control. Some people can handle it, and that's great. I'm not crapping on you people that can. That's wonderful for you. I know a lot of people who can go and have, a bottle of wine a week and be okay, or sit down and have a couple of Manhattans at the end of the day. Great. That's it. I can't have a couple. I will start to have a couple, and then I'll have a couple more, and then I won't stop. And then I go to jail every time. Pop psychology talks about, AA is like group therapy on steroids. It builds purpose for you. Okay. And then for like the aging members, it provides community against all the isolation that exists in our technological world. There's a 2021 study said that AA's spirituality model aids recovery like empirical faith. Okay. And the hard truth is, if AA is a cult, it's one that empirically works. Okay, unlike your solo sobriety attempts, which always are going to end up back in the bottle or straight to the needle. Okay, so there are benefits to all of this, right? There's science that backs it, and you can try and outsmart it all you want, but it's not going to happen. Okay, so in conclusion, is AA a cult? No, it's not. It's a flawed spiritual lifeline that has evolved from Jung's insights to a global force. Stigma is real, but so are the benefits. Less depression, stronger sobriety, absolutely backed by studies. And if it's watered down, you can blame inclusion, not weakness. All right, recovery, it definitely ain't perfect, but neither is AA. Dodging it over the cult fears, that's your ego talking. That's you just trying to get back to the bottle. All right? For all my recovery folks listening to this, here's your homework. Go and attend a meeting, cult or not. Just go and attend a meeting, and then journal your biases. There's no wrong answer here. Journal where you had issues. Journal your biases, and then share it in the comments. I want to talk about it with you. As always, thank you for listening to Sober Psychology. If you made it this far, I would love it if you would like, subscribe, share the video. Keep your head up, keep your heart open, and go help somebody. Love you guys.